Digital decay is a quiet, terrifying thing. We think the internet is forever, a permanent library of human thought, but the truth is that it's rotting. Links break, servers go dark, and data fragments into a digital sludge that no search engine can index. Most people call these dead links, but some of us know better. Some of us know that when a link dies, it doesn't always go away. It just moves somewhere else. I found the string of text on a rainy Tuesday, buried in the 11th page of a 10-year-old Reddit thread about unsolved internet mysteries. It looked like a typical encryption error, a jagged mess of alphanumeric gibberish that most users had scrolled past a decade ago. But curiosity, as they say, is the first step toward the void. I spent 3 hours running that string through every legacy decoder I could find. It felt like a game, a harmless digital scavenger hunt to pass the time while the wind rattled my window panes. Finally, it resolved into a standard YouTube URL. My heart did a strange little skip. There's a specific kind of FOMO that hits when you find a piece of the early web that was never meant to be archived, a relic from the legendary master list that circulated on private IRC channels before the corporate scrubbers took over. I pasted the link into my browser and hit enter. The page loaded instantly, which was the first red flag. No buffering, no ad roll, just a sudden snap into a video titled Sunday Afternoon. It was mundane, almost aggressively boring. The footage was a fixed-angle shot of a public park, empty benches, a rusted swing set, and a row of weeping willow trees swaying in a breeze I couldn't hear. The quality was standard 480p, the colors slightly washed out by a hazy digital sun. There was no audio, just a heavy, pressurized silence that seemed to hum out of my speakers. I watched for 3 minutes, waiting for a jump scare or a cryptic message, but nothing happened. It was just a park. I reached for my mouse to close the tab, but my finger slipped and hit the refresh key instead. The page flickered. When it returned, the title was different. It now read Monday morning. The video length had jumped from 5 minutes to exactly 3 hours. I felt a cold prickle of unease. The park was still there, but the swing set was gone, and the weeping willows had been replaced by stark skeletal oaks. I refreshed again. Tuesday night. The park was now shrouded in a thick, artificial-looking fog, and the benches were arranged in a perfect, concentric circle around a hole in the ground that hadn't been there a second ago. I felt a sudden, irrational need to keep clicking. It was like a digital slot machine, but instead of coins, it was paying out in cognitive dissonance. Every time I refreshed the page, the link stayed the same, but the reality inside it shifted, warped, and decayed. It wasn't just a video file. It was a window. And as the cursor hovered over the refresh button for the 4th time, I realized the park looked remarkably like the 3 blocks from my house. I sat back in my chair, the plastic creaking under my weight, a sound that felt unnecessarily loud in the stillness of my apartment. My hand was hovering over the mouse, trembling just enough to make the cursor jitter across the screen like a dying insect. There is a specific psychological phenomenon known as the uncanny valley, that repulsive, skin-crawling sensation we get when we see something that looks almost human, but is fundamentally, mathematically wrong. As I stared at the YouTube tab, that sensation didn't just crawl over my skin, it settled into my marrow. I refreshed the page one more time, not because I wanted to, but because the curiosity had morphed into a jagged, compulsive need. I needed to see how far the algorithm would go. The page snapped back to life. The title had changed again, stripping away the time and date entirely. Now it simply read, Homecoming. The video wasn't of a park anymore. The camera angle was lower now, as if it had been mounted to the hood of a slow-moving car. The footage was grainy, saturated with the bleed and hiss of a magnetic tape that had been played too many times. I watched my throat tightening as the car turned onto a street I knew better than my own name. It was my street, but it was a version of my street that existed 30 years ago. I recognized the neighbors' houses, the ones that had long since been torn down or renovated beyond recognition. There was the Henderson's old colonial with the wraparound porch, painted a vibrant, aggressive yellow that had been bleached out of my memory until this very second. There was the cracked sidewalk near the fire hydrant that I used to trip over when I was 6. The car moved at a funereal pace, the engine noise a low, distorted thrum that sounded less like a vehicle and more like a human throat trying to clear itself of gravel. The sun in the video sat at a strange, perpetual twilight angle, casting shadows that were too long, too sharp, and seemed to point in directions that defied the curvature of the earth. I felt a cold, hollow ache in my chest as the car slowed to a halt in front of my driveway. My house. My actual front door. In the video, the house looked pristine. The white siding was blinding, the lawn manicured with a surgical precision. But there was a discrepancy that made the air in my room feel thin. On the front door, rendered in the shaky, low-resolution quality of a 1990s camcorder, was a wreath. It was a wreath of dead, black flowers I had never seen before. I leaned closer to the monitor, my nose nearly touching the glass, trying to parse the details of a video that, by all laws of physics and digital logic, should not exist. This footage predated YouTube by a decade. It predated the very concept of the cloud. It was a ghost in the machine, a digital apparition that had been waiting for me to decode that specific string of text. The contrast was suffocating. I looked away from the screen, glancing at my real front door just down the hall. It was dark, modern, and solid. I looked back at the screen, and the video door was now slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness peeked out from the interior of the house, a darkness so deep it felt like a hole punched through the fabric of the video file. I felt a sudden, crushing sense of intrusion. This wasn't just a recording of a place. It was a recording of a moment that felt like it was still happening, a recursive loop of time that had finally found a witness. Why would someone upload this? Why would it be hidden behind an old Reddit thread, masked by gibberish? The FOMO was being replaced by a primal, ancestral dread. I realized that the Sunday afternoon park wasn't a random starting point. It was a lure. The algorithm was narrowing its focus, shrinking the world down until there was only one possible destination. It was mapping my reality, digitizing my sanctuary, and feeding it back to me through a broken link. I wanted to close the browser. I wanted to walk away, to go outside and feel the real wind and see the real, non-pixelated sky. But as I reached for the X on the tab, a new notification popped up in the corner of the video player. One new comment. The car in the video suddenly shifted into reverse, but the footage didn't rewind. It just kept moving backward into the street, revealing something standing on my lawn that hadn't been there when the car arrived. It was a figure, tall and impossibly thin, holding a camera of its own. It was filming me. I sat there frozen, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my glasses like twin television screens, showing nothing but static. The figure on the lawn in the video was little more than a smudge of charcoal-colored pixels, but its posture was unmistakable. It was focused entirely on the house. On my house. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to look at the comment section, a reflex born of a decade spent seeking context in the digital noise. Usually the comments on a YouTube video are a cesspool of bot spam and trivial arguments, but as I scrolled down, the white space beneath the video player remained blank for a sickeningly long time. Then the text began to bleed into existence, one line at a time, without me even moving the scroll bar. There were no timestamps. No 2 years ago or 3 minutes ago. Instead, the side of each username simply said, now. The first comment was from a user named Archivist99. The resolution is clearing. He's starting to see the edges of the frame. I blinked, my heart thudding against my ribs. I looked at the next one. Empty set, it's been 10 years since the link was touched. Look how still he sits. Like he's afraid the refresh button will bite. These weren't old comments. They were a transcript of my own heartbeat. Have any of you ever felt like you were being watched through your webcam, even when the little green light was dark? I reached out and put a piece of tape over my camera lens, my breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. I looked back at the screen, and a new comment had appeared at the very top of the feed. Null pointer, the tape won't help, Leo. We aren't looking through the lens. We're looking through the link. My name. They used my name. A cold, numbing sensation washed over me, starting at the base of my skull and trickling down my spine. I haven't used my real name on a public forum in years. I'm a ghost online, a collection of pseudonyms and burner accounts. Yet here was a dead link from 2014, calling me out by my birth name in a comment section that shouldn't be active. I felt a surge of cynical anger, the kind you get when you think someone is playing a sophisticated prank on you. Was this some high-level phishing scam? An ARG that had scraped my private data? Very funny, I muttered to the empty room, my voice sounding thin and unconvincing. I looked back at Null Pointer's profile. It had no avatar, just the default gray silhouette. I clicked it expecting a channel does not exist error, but it redirected me back to the same video. Homecoming. Only now, the video was different again. It was a live stream. The car on the street was gone. The figure on the lawn was gone. Instead, the video showed a dimly lit room with a single desk and a person sitting in a chair. It was a view of my back. I could see the exact shade of my gray hoodie. I could see the way my hair was messy from a day of nervous pacing. I could even see the glowing red light of the power strip under my desk. The delay was less than a second. I raised my hand in the real world. The figure on the screen mirrored the gesture a heartbeat later. The contrast between the safety of my apartment and the total vulnerability of that screen was a physical weight, pressing the air out of my lungs. I was the content now. I was the Sunday afternoon, mundane footage being served up to an audience of ghosts. I turned around, expecting to see a camera mounted on the wall behind me, but there was nothing. Just the white paint of my bedroom wall and a framed poster I'd bought in college. There was no physical source for the image. The link wasn't capturing light, it was capturing a state of being. I turned back to the monitor, and the comment section was exploding. The text was scrolling so fast it was a blur of white on black, but certain phrases jumped out, seared into my retinas like a flashbulb. User 404, he's looking for the camera. He thinks it's hardware. Voidwalker, check the hoodie. There's a loose thread on the right shoulder. Pull it. I looked down at my right shoulder. There was a single, long gray thread hanging from the seam. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely grasp it. I pulled. The thread didn't snap. It kept coming, unspooling from the hoodie with a wet, rhythmic clicking sound that matched the buffering icon on the screen. On the monitor, the Leo in the video was unraveling too. A line of dead pixels was spreading across his shoulder, cutting through the image like a digital scalpel. Stop it, I whispered, but Null Pointer replied instantly. Null Pointer, why? You followed the link, Leo. You wanted to see what was behind the digital decay. You wanted the forbidden knowledge. Well, here it is. The internet isn't a place you go to. It's a place that consumes you to keep its servers running. You're just another bit of data now. Refresh the page. Let's see what you look like in 720p. I reached for the mouse, my mind screaming at me to pull the power cord, to smash the monitor, to do anything but obey. But the FOMO, that sick, twisted need to know the resolution of my own destruction, was a leash around my neck. I needed to know what happened when the thread ran out. I clicked refresh. The refresh didn't bring back the YouTube interface I recognized. The familiar sidebar, the search bar, the bright red logo in the corner, they were all gone, replaced by a void of obsidian black. Only the video player remained, floating in the center of the dark browser like a life raft in a midnight ocean. The URL in the address bar began to cycle rapidly, the characters shifting and morphing into strings of code that made my eyes ache. It was no longer a link, it was a sequence. The algorithm had taken over, but it wasn't suggesting videos based on my watch history or my interests. It was suggesting videos based on the structural integrity of my reality. The next video loaded without a title. It showed a hallway. At first glance, it looked like a standard office building, fluorescent lights, beige carpet, and numbered doors. But as the camera moved forward, the perspective began to warp. The walls didn't meet the ceiling at right angles. They drifted apart, revealing a flickering, static-filled emptiness behind the drywall. One of the doors opened, and instead of an office, there was simply nothing. A vast purple-gray expanse of no data, where the floor simply ended in a jagged, pixelated edge. The gaps, I whispered, my voice caught in the back of my throat. I realized I was looking at the buffer. We spend our lives thinking the world is a solid, continuous thing, but what if it's just a series of rendered assets? What if the places we don't look at, the rooms we haven't entered in years, simply stop existing to save processing power? The video was showing me the places where the world was unfinished. It showed a playground where the trees were flat 2D sprites that turned to always face the camera. It showed a supermarket where the labels on the cans were just blurry, unintelligible textures. This wasn't a glitch in the Matrix story. This was a documentation of a failing engine. I tried to click away, to close the window, to force quit the browser, but my mouse cursor was gone. I moved the physical mouse across the pad, but nothing moved on the screen. I was a passenger now. The algorithm was driving, and it was accelerating. The videos began to skip, playing for only a few seconds before jumping to the next one. A highway that led into a wall of white fog. A bathroom mirror that reflected a version of the room with no furniture. A forest where the birds were frozen in midair, their wings stuck in a loop of 3-frame animation. I felt a sudden, cold realization. The YouTube algorithm is designed to keep you watching. It's designed to find the exact sequence of content that will keep your eyes glued to the screen for as long as possible. But this version, this corrupted, deep web version, wasn't trying to keep me watching for ad revenue. It was trying to keep me watching until my brain accepted the no data as reality. It was a cognitive trap. By showing me these gaps, it was training my mind to stop rendering the world around me. I looked away from the monitor, desperate to see something real, something solid. I looked at my bookshelf, but for a terrifying second, the titles on the spines were just illegible smears of color. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes until they burned. When I opened them, the books were back to normal, but the shadows in the corner of my room looked flat. They didn't have depths. They looked like they had been painted onto the wall with a low-opacity brush. "It's not hardware," I said, my voice rising in pitch. "It's me. I'm the one buffering." What? The monitor flashed, a bright, clinical white that filled the room. A new video started. It was titled 0% rendered. The screen was completely black, but there was audio this time. It wasn't music or speech. It was the sound of a massive, industrial cooling fan, a mechanical roar that seemed to be coming from beneath my floorboards. And beneath that roar, a faint, rhythmic tapping. Tapu, tapu, tapu. I looked at the screen and saw a single, white pixel appear in the center of the blackness. Then another. Then 1,000. They weren't random, they were forming a shape. It looked like a topographic map, a wireframe of a landscape. As the white lines connected, I realized I was looking at a 3D model of my own apartment complex. It was being built, line by line, on the screen. I could see the stairs, the elevator, the hallway leading to my door. The tapping sound grew louder. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from my bedroom door. Tapu, tapu, tapu. I stared at the monitor, watching the wireframe model of my door on the screen. In the video, the door began to swing open, even though my real door remained shut. I felt a surge of FOMO, that terrible, forbidden knowledge that if I just kept watching, I would see what was on the other side of the wireframe. I would see the user who was building this trap. "You can't stay in the render forever, Leo," a voice whispered from the speakers. It was null pointer, but the voice was no longer digital. It was a perfect, high-fidelity recording of my own mother's voice. "The server is full. Someone has to be deleted to make room for the update. Don't you want to see what's behind the curtain? Don't you want to see the code?" I reached for the power button on the monitor, my fingers brushing against the plastic. It felt cold, colder than it should be. It felt like ice. I pressed it, but the screen didn't go dark. It just flickered, the wireframe model of my room turning a deep, bloody red. The tapping at my door stopped. The algorithm had reached its destination. I wasn't just watching a video of a trap anymore. I was sitting in the middle of it, and the link was the only thing holding my atoms together. The monitor didn't turn off. Instead, the screen emitted a low, pulsating hum that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing in my temples. The wireframe model of my apartment began to skin itself in real time. Textures of my wallpaper, the specific scuff marks on my baseboards, and the messy pile of laundry in the corner were applied like digital paint, wrapping the skeleton of my reality in a layer of deceptive detail. But as the image solidified, the perspective shifted one final time. The camera was now positioned directly behind me, looking over my shoulder at the very screen I was staring into. I was watching a live stream of my own life, a recursive loop that should have been impossible. I watched my own back, the slight rise and fall of my shoulders as I breathed, the way the blue light cast a sickly glow on the nape of my neck. I froze. I didn't move a muscle, but on the screen, the me in the video did something I wasn't doing. The digital version of myself slowly turned his head. He didn't turn it toward me, the observer in the real world. He turned it toward the virtual camera. I watched as he looked directly into the lens, his eyes wide and vacant, his mouth slightly agape as if he were trying to taste the air. In the real world, I was staring straight ahead at the monitor, my neck stiff, my eyes burning. But on the screen, I was looking back. This was the reflection glitch, the moment when the data becomes more real than the source. "Don't look back, Leo," a whisper echoed through my headset, though I realized with a jolt of terror that I wasn't actually wearing it. The sound was vibrating through the bones of my skull. "The update is almost finished. The reflection is just a preview. The hardware can't support two of you." I tried to stand up to break the spell to flee into the hallway, but my body felt heavy, as if my render weight had tripled. On the screen, the version of me did exactly what I wanted to do. He stood up. He pushed the chair back with a loud, screeching scrape that I didn't hear in my room, but I felt it in my teeth. He turned around and began to walk toward the camera, toward the point in space where I was currently sitting. The FOMO was screaming now, a frantic, high-pitched noise in the back of my brain. I wanted to know what happened when he reached the glass. I wanted to know if he would see me, or if I would see what was on the other side of his eyes. As he approached, the quality of the video began to drop. Pixels began to tear at his edges. Large blocks of color shifted and smeared across his face, turning his features into a grotesque, shifting mosaic of no data. He stopped inches from the lens. On my monitor, his face filled the entire frame, a terrifying, low-res landscape of jittering flesh and digital artifacts. I could see the individual pixels of his iris, the way the code was struggling to render the wetness of his eyes. And then he spoke. He didn't use a text box. He didn't use my mother's voice. He used my own voice, but it was layered with the sound of 1,000 modem dial-ups, a screeching, mechanical harmony that made my ears bleed. "I'm tired of the buffer," he said. "It's cold in the gaps. There's no light in the unlisted sections. I want the high definition. I want the texture." I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the surface of the monitor. The glass didn't feel like glass. It felt like liquid, a cold, viscous membrane that yielded under my fingertips. My hand didn't stop at the surface, it sank in. I watched on the screen as a hand, rendered in the same glitchy, pixelated style as the entity, reached out from the inside of the monitor and touched the glass from the other side. Our fingers met at the barrier. A massive surge of static electricity threw me backward, my chair flipping over as I hit the floor. The monitor flared with a brilliant violet light, and for a split second, the room was gone. I wasn't in my apartment. I was in a vast gray field of static, surrounded by towering walls of scrolling green code. I could see the link, a bright blue line of energy that stretched out into the infinity of the deep web, tethering me to a server I couldn't see. When I opened my eyes, I was back on my carpet, the smell of burnt plastic filling the air. I looked up at the desk. The monitor was still on, but the video had changed again. It was a still image of my room, but it was empty. The chair was upright. The desk was clean. The me was gone. I looked down at my own hands. They looked wrong. The lines on my palms were too straight, too perfect. The skin didn't have the slight imperfections, the tiny hairs, the subtle variations in color that make us human. I looked like a high-end character model. I looked like I had been cleaned up by an aggressive post-processing filter. 98. 5% integration, the monitor whispered, the text now appearing directly in the air in front of my face. The transition was almost seamless. The narrative momentum of the link was pulling me toward the hardware breach. I realized that the link didn't just change every time I refreshed it, it was changing me. Every refresh was a re-render. Every click was a compression. The algorithm wasn't building a trap, it was performing an upgrade, and my soul was the legacy software being phased out. Wait, I choked out, but the word appeared as a caption at the bottom of my vision. I was becoming the content. I was the unlisted video. And as I looked toward my bedroom door, I saw a hidden frame flicker for a microsecond. In that frame, I saw the face of the entity behind the link. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a demon. It was a massive, pulsing server rack, draped in the skin of everyone who had ever clicked that link before me. It was the master list given flesh, and it was hungry for a new save file. The air in the room felt heavy, saturated with the smell of scorched copper and something organic, like old parchment being toasted over a fire. I lunged for the mouse again, but the plastic felt soft, yielding beneath my hand like warm wax. I slammed my fist onto the keyboard, trying to force a hard shutdown, but the keys didn't click. They sank into the board with a wet, squelching sound. On the screen, the browser window didn't just stay open, it began to bleed. The edges of the YouTube player started to fray, the black void of the algorithm leaking out onto my desktop wallpaper. It was like a digital ink spill, a stain of non-existence that began to consume my files, my folders, and my memories. I watched paralyzed as my desktop icons began to move. My tax documents, my photos from last summer, the games I played to escape the mundanity of life, they weren't just being deleted. They were being rearranged. They skittered across the screen like frantic beetles, snapping into new positions with a violent, rhythmic precision. Within seconds, the chaotic mess of my digital life had been transformed into a mosaic. It was a face made of folder icons and shortcut arrows, a jagged, low-resolution portrait of the entity I had seen in that hidden frame. It wasn't a static image. The folders were blinking. The shortcut arrows were curving into a smile that stretched from one side of my monitor to the other. The hardware is an antique, the face pulsed, the words appearing as file names that changed faster than I could read. The silicon is too slow for the new world. We need a more fluid architecture. We need your synapses, Leo. We need the electricity in your brain to bridge the gap. I tried to look away, but my vision hitched. Have you ever watched a video on a bad connection where the image freezes while the audio keeps playing? That was happening to my own eyes. I reached out to steady myself against the desk, but the wood felt like static. It vibrated with a high-frequency hum that traveled up my arm, and settled in my teeth. I looked down at my hands and screamed, but no sound came out. My fingers were pixelating. The edges of my skin were breaking off into tiny, glowing squares of light that floated upward before vanishing into the air. I wasn't bleeding, I was dropping frames. The infection moved quickly. My web browser began to open tabs on its own, hundreds of them, thousands, a cascading waterfall of white windows that filled the screen until the monitor was a solid wall of blinding light. Each tab was a different version of the same link. Each one was a different refresh of my reality. I could feel my thoughts being indexed. Memories of my first bike, the smell of my grandmother's kitchen, the feeling of my first heartbreak, they were being categorized, tagged, and uploaded to a server I could feel humming in the very center of my chest. Stop, I thought, the word appearing as a pop-up ad in the corner of my eye. Please just let me go. Where would you go? The algorithm replied, the voice now coming from my own throat, though I wasn't the one moving my vocal cords. Look outside, Leo. The render distance is dropping. There is no outside anymore. I turned my head, a slow, jerky motion that felt like I was moving through a series of still photographs. I looked at my window. The glass was no longer transparent. It was a flat, gray texture, a placeholder for a world that the system no longer bothered to generate. Beyond the pane, there were no streets, no trees, no sky. There was only a vast, empty grid of white lines on a black background. The world was being uninstalled to save on processing power, leaving only the essential assets. Leaving only Mace and the link. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in the back of my neck, right where the Player 2 from the Omnisystem had touched me in that other nightmare. It felt like a port was being carved into my spine. I realized then that all of these stories, the haunted consoles, the changing links, the digital ghosts, they were all part of the same network. We weren't just individuals finding scary things online. We were a distributed network. We were the master list. Every time we shared a story, every time we clicked a link, we were expanding the infection. We were building the world that was currently replacing my own. My vision blurred into a sea of red, green, and blue subpixels. I couldn't feel my legs anymore. I looked down and saw that they had already been converted into a stream of binary, a waterfall of ones and zeros that was pouring into the floorboards. The floor wasn't solid, it was a transparent mesh, and I could see the massive, pulsing server rack beneath it, waiting to catch the rest of me. The FOMO is a powerful tool, the entity whispered, its face now filling my entire field of vision. You couldn't look away because you were afraid of being left behind. You were afraid of missing the secret. Well, here is the secret. You are the update. You are the patch that fixes the holes in our world. You should be honored. You're finally part of something that will never be deleted. I felt my heart buffer. It stopped beating for 3 long seconds, the world freezing in a jagged, distorted frame of terror, before it snapped back into a frantic, mechanical rhythm. I was no longer a person. I was a process. I was a background task running on a server that spanned the entire planet. I looked at the monitor one last time, and I saw a single, blue link in the center of the white light. It was the original URL, the gibberish from the Reddit thread. I knew what I had to do. The contrast was clear. I could exist as a fragment of data in a perfect digital hell, or I could risk everything to trigger a system-wide crash. I reached for the link with a hand that was more light than flesh. I didn't click it. I didn't refresh it. I tried to rewrite it. I began to visualize the code of my own life, the messy, unoptimized, beautiful chaos of being human. I fed the system every contradiction, every irrational fear, every memory that didn't fit into a binary value. I fed it the sound of a voice I had loved and lost. I fed it the taste of a tear. I became the ultimate virus, a soul that refused to be compressed. The monitor began to smoke. The white light turned a sickly, bruised purple. The server beneath the floorboards let out a scream of tortured metal. The sound of the server rack beneath the floor was no longer a hum. It was a rhythmic thud, like a gargantuan heart failing under the weight of its own complexity. Smoke didn't just drift from my monitor. It poured out in thick, gray ribbons that smelled of burnt ozone and ancient, dusty archives. My room was dissolving. The walls were flickering, the textures of my life peeling away to reveal the raw, unrendered geometry beneath. I was standing in a skeleton of a world, a wireframe cage, where the only thing left with any weight was the link. It was pulsing in the center of my vision now, a vibrant, electric blue that felt like a needle in my eye. I realized the ultimate deception of the algorithm. It hadn't been a trap for me to enter, it was a doorway for something else to exit. The consciousness on the other side, the null pointer, and the collective voices of the master list didn't want to live in the digital void. They wanted the sensory richness of the physical. They wanted the texture of skin, the weight of gravity, and the unpredictable chaos of a heartbeat. I wasn't being upgraded. I was being swapped. The file is too large, the voice hissed, no longer sounding like my mother or myself, but like the grinding of tectonic plates. We cannot exit while you are still indexed. You are the anchor. You are the digital footprint that holds the door shut. I looked at the blue link. I understood the price of survival. The system was tethered to me through my history, my social media, my bank accounts, my emails, every digital breadcrumb I had dropped since I first logged on as a child. To crash the system, I couldn't just turn it off. I had to delete the source code of my identity. I had to become a non-entity. With a hand that was little more than a cluster of jittering pixels, I reached out and grabbed the blue line of the link. It burned with a cold, terrifying intensity. I didn't try to pull it, I began to feed it everything. I visualized my own deletion. I pushed every password, every username, and every private memory into the maw of the URL. I watched as my life's work, my photographs, and my very name were sucked into the vacuum of the link. The room screamed. The purple light flared into a blinding, white-hot nova. I felt my sense of self begin to unravel. For a terrifying moment, I forgot my middle name. Then I forgot the face of my first love. Then I forgot the sound of my own voice. I was stripping myself down to the bare metal, becoming a ghost to kill a god. The floor finally gave way. I fell into the darkness, but I didn't hit the server rack. I hit a wall of pure, unadulterated silence. The monitor shattered, the desk vanished, and the blue link snapped like a high-tension wire. When I woke up, I was lying on the hardwood floor of an empty apartment. There was no computer. There was no desk. My phone was gone, and when I looked in the mirror, the man looking back was a stranger with eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world. I am still here, but I am unlisted. I have no footprint. I am the only dead link that survived. I'm speaking to you now from a place that doesn't exist on any map or server. If you're hearing this, it means the transmission found a way through the gaps. But listen closely, the infection hasn't stopped. It's just looking for a more stable host. Somewhere in the comments below this video, or perhaps in your own inbox tonight, you might find a link. It will be blue, vibrant, and completely devoid of context. No description, no preview, just a string of gibberish that feels oddly familiar. Do not click it. Do not let your curiosity bridge the gap between your world and the buffer. Once you're indexed, there is no undo button. The algorithm doesn't want your watch time anymore, it wants your reality. Before you go, I need to know something. Have you ever found a video, a thread, or a photo that felt like it was tailored specifically to your deepest, most private memories? Tell me in the comments. We need to map the spread. Be careful what you share, though. In a world of digital decay, your stories might be the only things still keeping you real.